Hey everyone, it's Rob. We are continuing our conversation on the issue of immigration. At determinedtruth.com, we've done a series of introductory videos introducing the topic of immigration and what the church should be doing and the role of the church. And then we've had a series of other conversations. And today we're going to have another conversation. And the question we really want to ask, what if gangs threatened your children or war devastated your city? What if you had to grab your kids, gather what you could, carry and run away, leaving behind everything that you've ever known? What would you hope to find across the border? What does the gospel call us to do when we meet that stranger at the border? So today I'm again going to be joined by my colleague, Danny Hall. So Danny, thank you again for joining
Yep.
us.
Good to be here.
All right. But we have a special guest today, and we're excited to welcome on Isaac Villegas. Isaac is a pastor, writer, and a public theologian, a thoughtful and prophetic voice with the Anabaptist tradition. Isaac work explores the intersections of faith, justice, migration, and community. He's contributed to publications such as The Christian Century, Sojourners in the Anabaptist World. His theological reflections often challenge the church to embody a radical hospitality and a politics of compassion. Isaac is a former member of the executive board of the Mennonite Church USA and holds a deep commitment to peace, nonviolence, and solidarity within the marginalized world. And his book, which is up in the top corner above his head, is A Migrant God. And that's what we're going to be discussing. So today, thank you so much, Isaac, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Rob, Danny. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. Well, as Rob mentioned, the name of your book is Migrant God. What do you mean by that title, and how did you come to see God in that way?
The title came to me in a sermon. I think it was over a decade now. I was just preaching on a psalm about how God goes with God's people into exile, into a new land. And as I was preaching, I'm like, yeah, we worship a migrant God. And it just, as it popped into my head and as I said it, it just kind of stuck with me, jotted it down. And then around that phrase, I started gathering stories from my own experiences, readings of scripture, stories I've heard around, and it became a book. But yeah, so I mean migrant God in two senses. One is the way that God accompanies people on the move. So God, we believe in a God who's with us, Emmanuel. And that means that God goes with God's people wherever they might be going. If you have to leave in the middle of the night for whatever reason. And also that God is a migrant. That's what I think the incarnation is all about.
Right.
I remember growing up singing a praise song about how God came from heaven to earth to show us the way. And that's a migration story. So those, in both sense, the God who accompanies people on the move, and the God, because God loves this world so much, became one of us and joined us in this life.
I wish we would change the lyrics in that song a little bit to where he showed us the way back to the garden and not to some ethereal, heavenly, spiritual place up there. I think you would.
But you remember that song, Rob? You remember that song too?
I sure do.
I remember too.
And right now, I need to get it out of my head if we could do something different so I can get there. I'm not, and trust me, you don't want me trying to sing it either. So, Isaac, can you help us maybe understand your own story and how that influenced your work with immigration and kind of give us the background of yourself a little bit with that?
I'd say probably there's two places to start. And you can tell me if they're related or not. I still don't quite know which one came first, but I'm a child of immigrants. So my dad came from Colombia and my mom from Costa Rica, and they made a life together, my mom and dad, in California, Redondo Beach, Los Angeles area.
Oh, wow.
And that's where I was born. And, a lot of my family were immigrants, and people in the neighborhood where we lived and our community were immigrants. And there's not ever something like I thought of, there's this thing called immigration. It was just like life in the United States, just the air, the water, all around us. And so then it was only later growing up, I guess, because of more anti-immigrant rhetoric in this country and politics, that I realized that there was a word for it, and it described a people, and we should be thinking that way, and what it means to live as an immigrant in the United States. So that was that, personal story part of it. And then also just being a pastor for a while, people come to church and we care about them and they become brothers and sisters in Christ. We don't check documentation status at the church door. And, what does it mean when they're targeted by immigration agents or all of a sudden their lives feel under threat because they look like an immigrant or whatever it might be? We look like an immigrant, whatever that means. So yes, through pastoral care, pastoral life, and then just a Christian concern to love our neighbors. And when Jesus says, love your neighbor, at least in my version of the Bible, there's no footnote there that says, check their documents first to see if you can have it. It just says, love your neighbor as yourself. And that involves us in a life of all sorts of people around us. Some of those people who become part of our lives are immigrants. Some of them are undocumented.
Yeah. So just building on that, how does, your understanding of Jesus and the gospel, the mission of the church, kind of walk us through how that influences your work out? Because I think we're pretty good at compartmentalizing, where we have our, here's our Christian mindset and here's our political mindset. And sometimes they cross over on issues that might be personally important to us, but the ones that, so how do you, obviously your work is founded on your faith. Can you talk a little bit about how that integrates together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're totally right. It is very much about my faith, what I think about God, what I believe about God, the God I serve. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I would go back to that theological truth of the incarnation of the God who moves into the neighborhood. I remember reading back in college, Eugene Peterson's Message translation, where in John, in the prologue to John's Gospel, John 1, he had this. Do we call it translation? Do we call it paraphrase? I don't know. I remember at the time.
Yeah,
we call it back when I was taking Greek classes. My professors were sure to say, "No, this is not a translation. It's a paraphrase." Right. I don't know if we care anymore. Yeah. But yeah, he says, this word that Jesus comes and lives. It's God living with us. The Greek word is like tabernacling, and Eugene Peterson says, God moving into the neighborhood. And I always remember that. And I remember actually the first person who really made that pop in my mind was this guy, Father Boyle, who does Homeboy Ministries down in LA.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you all are familiar with him.
I am, yes.
Yeah, Tattoos on His Heart is that book. Anyhow, so he took that very seriously about his mission and his life and what he was doing. He's like, Jesus, God in Jesus Christ moves into the neighborhood, moves into like the hood and shows us how to live life together. And so looking to Jesus as a way of figuring out what it means to be Christian, to be human, to serve God. So that kind of ethic based on Jesus is what it's all about for me.
So early in the book, you start talking about your experiences in southern Arizona, and Danny lives in Tucson, and I live in Mesa, by the way.
So, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and by the way, I moved to Tucson from the South Bay in LA. I moved there from El Segundo.
Okay. I was born and raised in Lomita, and you probably know where that is.
Yeah, exactly. Where that is.
Yeah. But no, it's early in the book, you start talking about your experiences in the southern Arizona desert there. You discuss how the government deliberately created a barrier that funneled immigrants into the Sonoran Desert, knowing that they would not survive. You say, quote, U.S. enforcement strategists deputized the landscape. You add that the United Nations declares it the deadliest land route for migrants in the world. So let's begin by telling us about your experiences there. And then I think we might want to ask some critical questions kind of in response to, okay, well, what about, doesn't the government have the responsibility to protect its people and keep people out of our country? So why is that wrong? But let's go ahead and start by telling us about your experiences there.
Yeah. Growing up there, both in Los Angeles, and I had family in kind of the San Diego area. And at least when I was growing up, when we would drive down to visit family in San Diego, there was on Interstate 5, is it?
It's 5.
There's a checkpoint there, Border Patrol checkpoint where they would check documents. And it was just testimony to the way slowly that the border continued to move into the interior of the United States. So the border itself has migrated, actually.
Yeah.
But all that enforcement and the structures, the infrastructure there at the border began in earnest in 1994. It was during President Clinton's administration. And at that time, Doris Messner was a head of INS, Immigration and Naturalization Services, which was the precursor to ICE and DHS. And she wrote up this policy that has come to be known as prevention through deterrence. And the whole idea of prevention through deterrence was it just took stock of that people were crossing the border, they're growing up typically for farm working, the Tijuana border, let's say,
right,
because the U.S. economy needs farm workers, cheap labor, and exploits people from south of the border for that labor. But most people would cross without documentation there in urban centers, in twin cities, they call it. So there's San Diego or what is it actually that's right there on the border? Is it Chula Vista, I think? Is that right?
I'm not as familiar with California. Obviously, Huma.
On the U.S. You're talking about on the U.S. side?
Yeah, is it Chula Vista?
I think so.
Yeah, so on the U.S. side, it's Chula Vista. On the Mexican side, it's Tijuana. So it's a twin city. There's these twin cities all across the border, and they were there. They were one city before the border wall was built, one community, and then the kind of border bifurcated it. But yeah, with the detention through deterrence, they were saying, look, it's too expensive to have all these border agents here at the wall at the border. Let's build up walls and redirect people where it's more dangerous to cross. And so people were sent through the border enforcement to paths through the Sonoran Desert for them, just like, why would anyone cross there? It's so dangerous. Well, people do cross there. And in that border policy, the strategy, this push to more rural areas, more desolate areas, dangerous areas, was a refunneling to more hostile terrain is the language. And Messner, she said that she had hoped that the desert would be an ally to the Border Patrol's work of restricting people from coming. So it's an interesting case of like deputizing the landscape almost and environmental factors to do the Border Patrol's dirty work. So so since 1994, that's been increasing. It's also really important, I think, to note that the first fencing for the border wall there in the San Diego region, the San Diego sector, they called it, was repurposed military metal sheets from the Vietnam War. So these are like metal platform sheets that were used as helicopter landings in Vietnam for the U.S. Military. And so they had those left over, and you reuse that military infrastructure for the border wall. So when people talk about the militarization of the border, it's not an exaggeration. I mean, it's literally like military hardware is being used to reinforce the border wall.
So in your book, you describe fairly graphically and beautifully. Well, beautifully is probably not the right word. Explain for us or tell us some of the stories where you saw the consequences of this policy, because there's some of the stories in your book are extremely moving and disturbing. Can you share a couple of those with us just so people can understand what we're talking about, the consequences of this policy?
Weaponizing the border.
Yeah, the land. Right. Yeah, the weaponizing of the border. The person that, so I should say maybe like to step back a little bit with this book. So this book is life in this world as I continue to live it. I get more aware of just how much we're affected by sin, by evil. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, you grow up and you're more aware and you're just like, I can't believe what we've done to God's beautiful creation. And that has been especially the case with immigrant justice work, activism, solidarity with neighbors. That, I mean, it's pretty bad out there, and I despair a lot. But in the midst of it all, like, I would meet people who are doing amazing things. And when I would feel discouraged, I would just kind of replay their stories, their faces in my head, and remind myself that they're out there doing these good things. And that would give me some kind of hope to keep going in this work. And so I thought to myself, you know what? I'm replaying these stories in my head to give myself some hope. Maybe I should share them with other people to give some hope around. So so this book for me is very much like a sense of trying to share these stories of hope, to cultivate this hope, to say, like, people are doing something. We can do something, even if it's not huge and massive and changing the world. Some people are changing lives, and that might be enough for now. And so one of those people is Alvaro Enciso, and I got to spend time with him in Arizona. He lives in Tucson, and he goes out into the desert there in the Sonoran Desert, where estimates are that somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 people have died while crossing the border since 1994. There's a database. I haven't checked the database online, but they always update it about where somebody's remains were found, if they're able to identify the person, if they're able to provide enough identification and whereabouts so that loved ones where they left can track them down and figure out if they died and maybe reclaim their remains. And so Alvaro uses that database. It's set up by Pima County and the University of Arizona. And he goes out once a week. He's an artist, Alvaro, and he takes crosses that he's made in his own artist studio. And he's made these crosses with found objects from the desert. So he goes out and he finds stuff that people have left behind while crossing. So he might find like a wallet with like pictures, just strewn there in the desert left behind, or shoelaces, or glass from a bottle, all these sorts of things. He uses them and builds those into these crosses, which he thinks of as relics. And then he goes out and plants the crosses at the exact site, according to that database. The GPS coordinates are there, to the exact site where somebody's remains were found. And that's his devotional practice. And he takes people out with him. You observe a moment of silence there. When I was with him, he gave me some holy water that I think it was a Franciscan priest had left with him the last time. And he's like, "Hey, you're a priest. Why don't you anoint this cross?" And I didn't quite tell him being a Mennonite minister is different than a priest, but I'll use that water, sure.
Sure.
But he takes people. He's been doing this, I don't know, like maybe 15, 20 years now, Alvaro.
Wow.
And he told me that if nobody else, I was with him 8 years ago or so now. He said if no one else is added to the border or added to the database, he'll put crosses at each location there in the database by the time he's 127. So that's he can live that old. He might be out there. But it was just a powerful moment of marking, as Christians, the cross is very important to us. And to say that there's something about Jesus's story that illuminates what's going on here in the desert. And the best way to describe what's going on is something that resembles Golgotha. And he puts those crosses out there. So that was just absolutely powerful way of processing all the death.
Now, the Sonoran Desert, for those that are not aware, is basically the southern border between Arizona and Mexico.
Right.
It is nasty hot. I mean, it gets to be 110, 115 here in Mesa. You go a couple hours south and it gets even hotter. It's dry, it's barren. Do they have any estimate about how many people might actually survive that journey? I know that they found, do people make it across the border safely or not?
Yeah, people make it across. This is one of those things that's just so hard with immigration stuff to get numbers, to get data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if you successfully cross without documentation, you aren't documented in the data.
Yeah.
So
you're not going to go telling anybody, "Hey, I made it."
Exactly. Yeah. So estimates are hard to know. The last, rough estimate I saw is that there's 11 million people in the United States who are living without documentation. But who knows how many of those cross through that border?
Okay.
Somebody can come here legally with documentation and for whatever reason, their documentation expires or is taken away or whatever. So it's very difficult to calculate numbers.
Now, what about the idea that we're blaming the victims on? If the United States government is empowering the land to do its work, weaponizing the land, well, it's not the United States' fault. It's these people's fault for trying to cross our border illegally. How do you respond to that idea?
Yeah, that is. It's important to think about. Maybe one way to get at it is to tell a story of another person I met in Tijuana this time. I was in Tijuana at the migrant shelter. It's operated by the Scalabrini Order of Priests. And the Scalabrini are so interesting. They were started in the early 20th century, I believe, if I remember correctly. And they were founded upon the mission to minister to people on the move. So refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers throughout the world. And so they've set up shelters and different ministries to minister to people on the move throughout the world. And so I was there in their Tijuana shelter volunteering, and there in the kitchen, I was helping making snacks for people, and some new arrivals were in there too, and they wanted to help out. And this woman had just arrived with her husband and a teenage son, and she was from Sinaloa, Mexico, and she was making tortillas there, Sinaloan tortillas, which are amazing. There's aside food.
Yeah, you're good.
I would say like one of the key, I realize now as I talk about my book, is that like food is kind of a subplot throughout the story.
Yes, I noticed that.
So hopefully the food writing counts for something.
Okay.
Yeah, some good stuff in there.
Yeah. Hopefully it makes people hungry. Like that's what
right.
But tortillas down there in like the Sinaloa era, there's nothing like them over here in my part of the country. There's like the Sonoran tortilla. So those of you in Arizona, hopefully you're eating a lot of them. I'm jealous of the tortillas.
Okay, well, come visit. We'll have you come.
Anyhow, so she was making tortillas there on the stove and flattening them out with her hands, passed it to her son who was frying them on the stove. And I was just listening, and she was telling me her story. And she said that a couple nights ago, they were just like at home, and a local gang that was affiliated with the cartel, the Sinaloan drug cartel. I mean, it's more than a cartel now. I mean, it's just a major business apparatus throughout Mexico and the United States. Anyhow, some members of that gang showed up at her house and said, "Hey, look, your son has turned 16. He has two options. He can either be jumped into our gang or we will kill him." And that's what happens. Like, that's like the rite of passage in that area. And so she was like, that night we packed up all our things and left. And I have a sister in Fresno, and hopefully we can make it to where she lives. Well, I mean, that's the kind of story. That's where we're going. So it's like,
yeah.
Do you want to? What would it mean to blame the victim? I mean, anyone in her situation, like
exactly.
Your son is a teenager, and all of a sudden he's going to be jumped into a violent gang and made to do horrific things with his life, or he might get killed. Like it's not even a decision. You know what I mean? Like it's just instinct. It's just what you do. Anyhow, so I thought like that was such an illuminating story for me to hear, and I was so grateful for her sharing it with me as just kind of like one window into what must be a multitude of situations like that.
Yeah. Well, let me just for sake of clarification for our listeners too, because one of the things we get pushed back on all the time, or I get in these discussions too, is there is a genuine national security interest at the border. Let's just say, for sake of argument, 95% of all the people that cross that southern border did so for some reason similar to what you've just outlined, whether it's economic or oppression or genuine fear of life or limb, whatever. There's still a percentage, no matter how small, there's still a number that are here for nefarious reasons, who are actually trying to use this cover of the people's plights to infiltrate and cause harm, and that so the government has a responsibility to protect its own citizens. And so I get this argument all the time. We do have it. So how do you balance the humanitarian side of things with the national security side of things? So what does a humane border policy look like? And by the way, this thing has been kicked around for generations in Congress, and there's been no significant reform on the border for decades. And it's mostly because it becomes a wedge issue for elections rather than a problem to genuinely be solved. So we kick back and forth between humanitarian crisis and genuine national security issues. What are your thoughts on that whole dilemma? Or do you see it as one?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And all those issues, I think it's like important to get into specifics, I think. So,
Sure.
Like we have myths that we live by, and sometimes the mystifications, I don't know, maybe occlude the specifics, the details. So it'd be, a question like what kind of national security concerns we might have. Like what are they? I don't even, it's hard to know. So like, for an example, when people start talking about like fentanyl being a huge problem, let's say coming across the border. I mean, that's one example that people point to a lot. And then you just look at the data and it's like, no, 96% of the fentanyl that crosses the southern border is crossed by US citizens. It's like 96%.
Right.
So do we want to, so for national security concerns, should we not allow US citizens back in the United States? You know what I mean? Like, how do we deal with that problem? It's
and one of the ones I hear too is I have, it's outside the scope of this conversation immediately, but let's just say in my personal history, I have people who are involved in national security, friends who've been at high levels of that. And when we get in this debate all the time. And one of them is that since 9/11, there's been a steady, slow influx of people from other regions of the world because they're brown skinned. They look like Central and South Americans. They use the cover of this to basically infiltrate. And so there are some genuine terroristic, people on the terrorist watch list that have been found to have come through and stuff like that. So again, I'm not advocating for particular, I just know this is the kind of things that people bring up when they're talking about this. And maybe, that there are some, so that we have to the idea is that people find themselves caught between, they hear a story like you told about the young boy that's being, going to either go into a gang or die if they don't flee. And then the realization, but there are some security things. I don't know how to solve this. I don't know how to balance this. And I get people all the time in that, caught in that.
Right. Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, we all want to live like in safety, right? This is like a human concern. And like, we need to be grateful for people who help make us safe and live. And I want that too. But national security issues, but it's also just so complicated. I'm just trying to think in my head about, like 9/11 was really bad. That was horrible. It was like, it really shaped my vision of the world. It happened when I was in college, and I still think about the vulnerability and all of that. But I also grew up with the Oklahoma City bombing too.
Sure.
Timothy McVeigh. Down here, like there was the shooting at Mother Emanuel, Dylan Roof. I mean, I'm just going through my mind, and I'm just like, white people are terrorists too.
Of course they are.
100%. And there are like, homegrown white terrorist threats. And I don't understand how border enforcement policies protect us from that very lie. I mean, it feels like these things should be taken care of, but it seems like a distraction to say, you know what? If we just have better border enforcement strategies, we were going to be a safer country. And that's just not true.
Yeah.
one of the points that I've been trying to make, and some of the things that I've
Let
done,
me
some
just
with
follow up
Dan-
on Rob, can I say one more thing?
yeah, please.
I mean, also recognizing that the violent crime rate for immigrants is lower than it is for people born in the United States.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So it's
right.
This stuff is just not true on the ground. It's just not true in reality.
Yeah, and that's one of the points that I was going to make, is that the statistics of terrorist attacks and violent crimes, actually immigrants aren't doing it. So I wonder how much that is used as a propaganda to therefore militarize ICE or whatever to stop this problem, and to allow the empire to do what it's doing and justify its acts of terror. Whereas the church should be going, okay, great. If a Jew escapes Nazi Germany, the first thing we're not going to do is go, are you here legally or illegally? We're going to say, how can I help you? How can I care for you? Now, at the same time, I might be aware, and we all have to have aware and caution. All of us have served as pastors on this call, on this panel. So someone comes into our church, they're asking for help, and we have a process. We're going to go, because we want to make sure there's a legitimate need, that we're not just handing out aid to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea, what I see happening, is that we've so weaponized the border that we've said, therefore, no one can cross. We don't allow anyone to cross. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the issues. The second issue that we've brought up, Danny and I have on other live streams, including the one last week, is, hey, a lot of the people that are fleeing the borders, fleeing to our country, are coming because of what the United States has done in their countries. And the United States has to bear some burden of responsibility to say, hey, we trash their countries, we impoverish their people, we help indeed facilitate the gangs and the cartels to come about because of our corporations and the things that we've done with the banana republics, or because of NAFTA and things like that. And then these people flee to our country, and we have no care or concern. And as the church, and I think what I found about your book was, the church was saying, okay, our job is to have compassion here. That's what we start. So I don't know if you want to comment on that or have any thoughts there.
Yeah. Well, Danny, were you going to say something before too?
No, I 100% agree with what Roger said. We've had some really interesting conversations about that side of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it is. I guess maybe with the thing that I feel passionately about is that what it means to be Christian in this world is, like, we can't control it all. Like I know me and my church, and being a pastor for a while, like, I care about a lot of stuff, and I feel myself involved in structures of sin beyond my control, and I repent and try to live differently. But at some point, like, I realize I can't change it all, but there's at least something that I can do to love my neighbor. And that's something I can pour my life into. And God thinks of that as just as important, that kind of love, and to cultivate that love in our lives. And so, your example of all the, the US sponsored wars in Central America, let's say, during Reagan's presidency, that he didn't want to acknowledge. And so he called those people who were fleeing conflicts in these republics that you were talking about, Guatemala, El Salvador,
Nicaragua. And go down the whole list. Yeah.
So many. And he refused to acknowledge, I mean, this is the whole Iran-Contra scandal, for those of us who've been around for a little while. And he refused to acknowledge any kind of involvement, protecting himself. And so he said, no, there's no conflicts going on there. That's not war. Those aren't wars. They're just like, they're working out their situation. The people at the border who are coming are economic migrants. That's where we consider economic migrants. They're just looking for a better life. And the churches there in Arizona and California were like, that is not true. These people showing up at our border and in our churches are like, they have gunshot wounds, and they have stories of political oppression and repression, are fleeing for their lives, and we have to care for them. And so it's the witness of the church that says, look, there are people here who God calls us to love. We have to do something about that. And so it was the beginning of the sanctuary movement in the 1980s in the United States, where churches, I mean, they're in Tucson, Southside Presbyterian, very important. Churches were welcoming folks who were fleeing these wars, and they said, look, we're going to take care of them. ICE, or not ICE at the time, immigration police, you're not allowed to trespass onto church property. This is God's house. And we will take care of our siblings in Christ no matter what. And so that kind of witness of
exactly.
something you can do, something the church can do based on a long history of church tradition, of scripture, the cities of refuge in the Old Testament being examples. That I feel confident in that. Like we are grounded in our faith, in the story of what it means to be the church. And we can do this. This is something we can do.
I think it's hard. I think as Americans, it's really hard for us to separate our calling as Christians from our identity as Americans.
Yeah.
And
which is a problem.
And I think we've been doing a lot of stuff on Christian nationalism. We've covered a bunch of topics that are germane to this. But I think that's where it gets tough for the American Christians. Is I think you're 100% right. We're called to love our neighbor, love the person that's in front of us, to speak out against systems that are unjust, and all of those things are true. But then there's this part of us that goes, yes, but as an American, I see this, that, and the other as problematic, and so there's this conflict, internal conflict for a lot of people, and I feel it myself sometimes. This back and forth. So that's and pastorally that can be hard with people.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean that's my story too. Like I was, I grew up. Makes no sense now, given my own like racial ethnic identity. Now that I look back, but I mean, I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh. I can't even remember how that happened, but I was taken by all of that. And for me, it was 9/11, where I had friends, and I was part of a church that was like, look, we have to take revenge here. Like this is a crusade. George Bush called it a crusade right after 9/11, and and to launch an invasion and the war on terror. This is a crusade. And all of that made sense to me for a little bit. Then the more I thought about it, I was just like, but this Jesus that I follow doesn't quite jive with that. It was this moment of just like cognitive dissonance. I'm like, what is going on here? And that has been my own long journey of how to disentangle kind of this American sensibility in the world and this Christian sensibility. And I think the thing that I've grown more and more, the thing that has been more and more compelling to me, I should say, is the significance of Christian baptism. And what does it mean to be baptized into a new family, a new way of life, where we are adopted into God's kingdom and God's family, and we are given siblings throughout the earth. The old language of the church for this is that we belong to the one holy and apostolic church, universal church, or the Catholic with a small c church, that our lives are bound up together so that if any member rejoices, we rejoice. And if any member suffers, we suffer along with that. That is who I am. Like I cannot think of myself without those networks of relationships that reach beyond nation states, that reach beyond citizenship, that are more essential for who I am. I think that's what I've grown more and more comfortable with, as just like getting my bearings. In this U.S. context is, well, no, I am primarily, like who I am fundamentally is I've been baptized.
Exactly.
That matters for who I am.
Into Christ,
Into Christ. Yeah. And, if anyone is baptized, there's a new creation. Like we're part of a whole new thing going on here.
Yeah. And I think understanding what that means, implications of what that means. So I'm doing a series, a commercial introduction here, on determinedtruth.com. Again, you can go to our website. That's how you connect with me at rob@determinedtruth.com, or you can go to our website, determinedtruth.com, go to the YouTube tab. When you go to the YouTube page, click on the playlist, Immigration, of course, but we also have another playlist called Revelation Revealed. And I've been doing a series of videos myself, about 6 to 15 minutes long, walking through key parts of the book of Revelation to say, what is the call upon God's people in the book of Revelation? And one of the dangers in Revelation is to watch out for empire and the propaganda of the empire. and what it means to be that alternative people. So I would add to what you're saying, Isaac, in terms of not only are we called to being in Christ in this new family, but what it means to be in this new family is to be the light to the nations, to take the gospel and the goodness of Christ, the compassion and love of Christ to the nations. And that means so that when someone comes to our church and they have a benevolence request or whatever, we give them benevolence. Of course, we screen them out. We're cautious. When someone crosses our border, we love them. One of the things that I'm concerned about is the fact that we are reticent to do that because we don't want to jeopardize our own prosperity, our own comfort, our own level of security. So we defend that under, well, the United States has security needs and security concerns, and I don't deny that those are real. But the reality is, as you said earlier, the numbers don't show that it's the immigrants that are causing the problem, and we've done a number of things on that as well. So let me go ahead in the last few minutes, if I can. You can comment on that if you want as well. But you talk about how in the book how during Trump's first term he intensified the seizing of immigrants. You have a quote on page 68. It says, ICE agents prowl through our communities on clandestine operations, trying to evade public awareness and accountability in pursuit of undocumented people. This federal obsession with the documentation of certain residents extends the long U.S. tradition of racialized surveillance, strategies to control Black populations redeployed against migrants. So talk about what you're seeing now here in Trump's second term, obviously with $100 billion being given to ICE and things like that as well. So.
Yeah, so much money. Yeah, maybe just to highlight what I was trying to do with that. Thanks for reading that passage. And what I was trying to highlight in that chapter is that, like, the racialized surveillance of peoples is not something new. Like, this is an old story. And I point to, there's a couple different places you can start to talk about where documenting people's belonging starts being written into law. And a couple places are what's called in mid 18th century colonies in New York City. They came up with the lantern laws, and what they were trying to do was to try to provide some kind of identity marker for people who were authorized to walk between homes, between neighborhoods at night. So if you were a white propertied man, you have no restrictions. You can do whatever you want. If you're a woman, you would need like someone to go with you, a man to accompany you.
Wow.
But then if you were non-white, so in that area, there's 3 different categories of people that were named in this law. So one was Black. I mean, their language was Negro. The other was mulatto, and the other one was native. So those are 3 categories of people that they said could not be traveling at night alone unless they were about their master's business, basically. And what gave them authorization, the way that you were able to identify those people who could be walking at night on business, they carried a lantern. And so they were called the lantern laws. So that was like an early form of documentation to say, hey, look, this person is enslaved and about their master's business and therefore are allowable to be walking at night. So this, you can see just how far back this fear goes in the US psyche, or the colonial psyche at that point, of non-white people and what they're about. Like, what are they doing out there? And keeping track of them. So that's an important precursor to these ways of documenting people. So yeah, I kind of tell that story a little bit to say this is not new, but this is a long colonial project in the United States, especially to kind of enshrine European white identity as belonging to that the power belongs to those kinds of people, those who have been racialized in that way. But I mean, all that, to be honest, like that part of the book, I get a little bored with. We think history is important, so we kind of do it. This is where it comes. But I don't know. People are welcome to skip those pages. But actually, Rob, what you were talking about Revelation is more interesting to me as I think about this as immigration stuff and our call as Christians and thinking about a migrant God. is because I also think that I'd be interested in at some point figuring out how to do this in a like robust fashion, but to think about one of the subplots of the Bible as immigration, as migration. Because, like with any plot of any narrative, the opening scene and the closing scene are pretty important to saying like what this book's about.
Right, exactly.
And the very first scene or first-ish scene of the Bible is these people, Adam and Eve, who like are in a place, the Garden of Eden, that's their home, and they're forced to migrate.
They're
forced by God to leave their homeland and to work out an existence through like sweat and toil east of Eden. So that's what gives the book like the plot line. It's this forced migration there from the Garden of Eden. And then the book of Revelation there at the very end in chapter 21, I don't need to tell you this, you're teaching these classes, but it is the migration of heaven to earth. The new Jerusalem comes down from heaven to earth. It's God's kingdom coming down to join us. So it's the migration of a whole city, a whole reign. So you can just, and then, like along the way, we got
Abraham being called to come to this land that I will show you. Abraham, come here, come back to the garden. It's constantly the story of coming. And the idea, sorry to cut you off there, what be included as well is the fact that it's not just come back to the garden, but bring as many people as you can with you. Right, bring them with you. Have them join. The nations will walk by us light. The kings of the earth will bring their glory, their bounty into it. So it's the call of God's people. And how do they do that? By showing compassion, care, by being the good Samaritan. That's what it looks like. So
and I don't want to, I get a little worried sometimes if we draw too quick of an analogy between like that image in Revelation 21 of this new city and saying, well, that's what our nation states should look like. And what I mean? This is like a long danger. Dangerous. But I mean, but what you're talking about there, like this Christian calling of invitation of the nations to bring their, offerings and their goodness into God's presence means something for our lives, right? About how we live, even if it's not an image of the United States, it should be an image of what we are like as God's people. And what's always so interesting to me about that passage is it goes to the author, the seer, John the seer, goes through great length to describe the massive walls, like how big they are, how many cubits, the material, the building materials. And you're just like, oh my gosh, this is a massive project going on here. And then it says there is it 12 gates? I can't remember.
Yeah, 12 gates. Of course.
12. Then it says there are 12 gates and they are never shut.
Exactly.
And it's just like, wait a minute. You got this huge wall. You just finished telling me how impressive these walls are. And then you're telling me that there's like a ton of gates and like they're always open. And
it's always day there. It's never night. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to worry about people sneaking in.
That's an image there of what it means to be a people is like we're worried about some definition of who we are, but at the same time, we're always permeable, and hospitality is the Christian calling. Therefore, you never close off how people can come in.
Exactly. Yeah, very much.
Listen, we're getting close to our time here. So if you could just leave one final message to the church as a whole, you could just sum up what your heart is, what you hope that people will take away from this conversation, from your book, from your life. What's your message to the church as a whole?
Yeah, so I'm on a journey here, and I will say the thing that has been probably more prominent as I think about my own life and my faith, calling of the church, is I just get back to the simple things, the basic things, actually. And just this line that Jesus says about, it's all this life is summed up in two commands that are basically, related the same, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I am just still learning how to do that. And that call to loving our neighbor I think takes a lifetime to figure out what it means. And I think that means everything for how we consider people who are our literal neighbors, who may or may not be documented.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for the time, and I want to encourage everyone to get the copy of the book. We'll put a link to it in the show notes down there.
Just so people know, the book is a great read. It's well written, and it's not. It's
Yeah.
relatively short,
Yeah.
and so it's not, you know, it's not. It's filled with some incredible stories too. I want to
Yeah, it is.
emphasize
Good
that
stories.
that are worth reading because it illustrates the point. So yeah, I highly
Yeah.
recommend the book as well.
Thank you, Danny. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your time. And again, everyone, go to determinedtruth.com to get all the resources and upcoming live streams. We have another one on Thursday on fascism. And is Trump a fascist? So that should get some attention there as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Right.